Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs releases on the 13th of April, which means that I can finally now drop my review regarding the DLC and pretty much everything that's led to it. There's going to be a lot to talk about. I imagine that this is going to be quite a large video, so you might want to go get some snacks. Now, before anything, I do have to give a disclaimer. I am, of course, a content partner with Creative Assembly, which means that I get the DLC quite early and even earlier than a lot of other creators. I've been able to look into it into a longer point of view, which is why I have a lot of playtime under the DLC. There's also the case that my name is on the credits for said DLC for Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs, but I will say one thing, and it's very important here, that despite all that, I am being completely and 100% unbiased towards my review. You are my viewers, you're the ones that keep this channel going, and you're the ones that need to be informed about a lot of things regarding DLCs, content, and so on. The reason I can say that is because, unlike other creators, I am not putting pre-order links in my videos, sometimes multiple ones, yet in videos saying, I'm not too sure about the DLC yet. If you want to support the channel, you might as well buy it from this link. It gives me a good kickback. Not once have I done this in the lifetime of Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs, so my review is simply based on a fan. There's no monetary gain from this. I have both called out and praised Creative Assembly for multiple things, and it will continue to be like this on this channel. And one final thing before we actually begin, I do sound a bit rough, I do apologize, it's because I've been ill for a few days, but I wanted to get this review done so you could make an informed decision if you wanted to buy this DLC or not. So, let's just jump right in, shall we? So to begin, we have to say, who are the Chaos Dwarfs? The Chaos Dwarfs are a race in Warhammer Fantasy that have been very much anticipated to join the series, not since the recent times in Warhammer 3, but rather since Warhammer 1. Ever since the series was announced, people were asking for the Chaos Dwarfs because they are a very unique and interesting race. Dwarfs, but not as resistant to magic. Rather, they use magic, extremely powerful artillery, and also use big monsters. They're a race that had an army book way back in the day, in the early 90s, late 90s, and then nothing really happened until later 2000s, where we finally got the return of the Chaos Dwarfs in the form of a Forge World army, horrendously overpowered as they were because Forge World has that thing. They've been much beloved for many, many years. The fact that Games Workshop haven't even brought them back in newer settings is absolutely baffling. But hey, we finally got them in Total War, and this is for people who like gunpowder, who like explosions, or lots of explosions, an interesting new lore of magic, and, well, just a lot of heavy frontline. The Chaos Dwarfs are very well known for that, and it's definitely something that gets represented in this DLC. I must say that from someone who has watched the Chaos Dwarfs in action on the tabletop a lot, who has played against them a lot of times, this is a pretty good representation. But we can't really talk about the tabletop too much now, we have to talk about the actual game. So 3 legendary lords were introduced with this DLC. Less than we've had from previous race packs in Warhammer 2, as there's normally 4, but here we have 3. The characters themselves are Drozhov the Ashen, Zatan the Black, and Ostrogoth Ironhand. Rather popular characters, Drozhov being introduced in 8th edition during the much beloved Tamukhan campaign, a rather awesome book, one of the best that Games Workshop have ever released, and the latter two being introduced during Old Hammer, so older editions and so on. They're very much beloved because at the end of the day, you know, classic characters returning into a new light is obviously quite cool. There are, of course, distinctions here. Drozhov is a spellcaster who follows on the law of Hashut, flies around on his massive mount Cinderbreath, does a lot of damage. You've got Zatan the Black, which is very focused on melee and just boosting up the faction in general, mostly focusing himself, actually. And then Ostrogoth Ironhand with his baby stroller. He's another spellcaster using a mix of the Law of Fire and the Law of Hashut. Admittedly, it would have been nice to have 4 legendary lords. Many people were expecting Chator the Executioner, which is a character that was intended for Warhammer Fantasy. He was released with a square base after all, well, rectangular, but unfortunately was moved to Age of Sigmar because of the end times, and Games Workshop, not CA, Games Workshop consider him to be a Age of Sigmar character. This means that a character such as Chator will never make it into Total War Warhammer unless he gets brought back into Warhammer the Old World, the newer setting of Warhammer Fantasy, which is expected later this year. Now, the fact that we only have 3 legendary lords is a little disappointing. People blame it on shrinkflation. There's also the case that many people only play the main 3 and don't play the 4th. This is kind of known throughout the other race packs that we've had, you know, the Tomb Kings one and the Vampire Coast. But it is kind of disappointing. There are a few characters that might have not had models, but could have had a really interesting redesign if Creative Assembly were given the opportunity. We don't know here what was happening during the production of the DLC, and I doubt we ever will, because Games Workshop are a factor. Games Workshop are a complete factor when it comes to any future content, what's happening. They approve what unit gets made or not. Still, it's 1 legendary lord less, which means 1 start position less, and it's likely that this is going to be the future regarding new content. Creative Assembly have gone on record saying that they want more legendary heroes, and you know, that's perfectly fine. I just don't feel like at the cost of other content is okay, considering that we've had DLC drops with other legendary heroes. Now, we've mentioned legendary heroes, so we might as well talk about the only one available in this DLC. This is Gorda's Backstabber, a character from the Hobgoblins that joins up with the Chaos Dwarfs. He is kind of beneficial, I must say. You can get him as early as pretty much turn 4 or 5, depending on who you play and how you build up with some construction. The character is very, very strong, providing a lot of benefits to Hobgoblins early on, meaning that you'll be able to actually have a decently powerful army in the early game, and you'll be able to dominate quite early. Now, the problem is that Creative Assembly didn't really have a information on how to actually unlock him. So you actually unlock him by building up the Hobgoblin building. This means that, yeah, if you take over a settlement and it's there, you have to destroy that building and then reconstruct it. It's kind of annoying, because some information would be great. Even I didn't know this. I actually had to get told by a dev. Now, another thing here is that the character doesn't really have like a quest chain or anything. It's literally just recruit 8 hobgoblins and you're done, which is okay. You get the hero quite early on. But considering that former DLC, like for example the Twisted and Twilight, had quest chains for all 3 legendary heroes. That's the thing. That patch cycle had 3 legendary heroes. It's a bit of a shame. It feels that there has been a few cases of just like, oh, what can we just not do and get away with? Which, you know, fair enough. I guess they were kind of pushed for time, and it's kind of obvious for certain things, but it's just a little annoying. I will say, though, that getting the character early is very, very good for your campaign, as he boosts up your Hobgoblin units as soon as he gets to rank 5, so you're going to be able to focus down that as much as possible. It just feels empty in a sense. Don't get me wrong, I like the character, I think he's very, very cool, but the legendary hero only feels like a legendary hero in skills and unique look alone, not in the way that you unlock him. Some people might like that, some people might not, but I'm certainly wishing that there was a little bit more, you know, a quest battle or something cool, you know? I think I'm only annoyed because the FLC hero, and we'll talk about FLCs later on in the video, Ulrich has a longer chain quest. It's got a lot more fluff to it, a little bit more context, so it just feels like it's better done than Gorda's. Now, Gorda's is a lot stronger. Gorda's presents a lot more bonuses, but a little bit of theming is always a really good thing. Now, we'll talk about start positions before we actually get into the rest, because start positions are actually quite important. We're going to talk only about the Immortal Empires ones, because really I'm more interested in Immortal Empires, and I know the majority of the player base cares more about the Immortal Empires than they do the Realm of Chaos. So, yeah, there's not a lot of variety. You've got 2 in the Darklands and 1 very close to the Darklands. The fact is that the majority of the Chaos Dwarfs in lore, like the grand majority, can be found in the Darklands. Very rarely will loads of them go out in numbers unless they're invading or sending a force, like for example Zatan is. So yes, it's definitely lore friendly, but I feel like they should have had a little bit of creative input here, as varied start positions is what adds to replayability. I'm more interested in playing a race which has loads of varied starts than I am with a race that is very centralized. With the Chaos Dwarfs, I've mostly been doing the same thing. I've been going in the Grand Cafe, taking that, and then moving west shortly after, whilst also allying up with the Chaos Forces, who seem to be a lot more aggressive now, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The mechanics are centralized around Zarnagrun, so it does make sense that all the Chaos Dwarfs are there, and stuff could change in the future. We do know that Creative Assembly have gone on record stating that possible new Chaos Dwarf characters could come in the future. Yes, this would be DLC for DLC, but we've already been living that through Warhammer 2, and the fact is that people are kinda okay with that as long as it's done well. But yeah, it would be nice to see a Chaos Dwarf faction that isn't centralized, which would be somewhere else, just to allow for another unique experience. Now, before we jump into the other points of the gameplay, we do have to talk about some miscommunication. Yes, a member of Creative Assembly staff kind of shot himself in the foot because the problem is, you know, new mechanics and so on, unique mechanics, that mention for Legendary Lords. So, in fairness, yes, there is a little bit of uniqueness. Each of the factions do have their own faction traits, which are completely unique to them, but wording could have been a bit better here, which did get the fanbase kind of pissed off, understandably so, as, you know, when you work in PR, you kind of need to make sure that there's no room for interpretation. It's one of those things where it's not just for content creation, it's not just for game companies, it's literally for everyone. So a lot of people were hyped up thinking that all the Chaos Dwarf Lords were going to have their own unique mechanics, which was obviously not true. The thing is, there has been some minor unique mechanics for, say, the Vampire Coast, with the Grand Declarations of War for Count Noctilus, and you know, just like how the Undead Bretonnians work for Silistra Diaphin, Fractured Mind for Luthor Harkin, and obviously some humans, that was its own shit show for Aranessa, but the rest of the other race packs, you know, the Tomb Kings didn't really have anything unique about them in terms of their own mechanics, barring Arkan with some undead units. Neither did the Beastmen and the Wood Elves. Yes, there was some things which could be considered unique, but it's nothing like what people were expecting. People were expecting, you know, a new button, a new toggle, a new panel. It's a bit of a weird thing, but I will say, given what we know about the Chaos Dwarfs in terms of all the mechanics that we do have, yeah, I don't really think that unique mechanics would have been good for all the Legendary Lords, as it would have probably bloated them up too much. I will say, however, that I do believe that that statement did kind of hurt the promo for the DLC, which is kind of expected. Because if you raise people's expectations and then say, no, I was wrong here, or, you know, just there was miscommunication, misinterpretation, that can cause some problems. Anyways, we've spent a lot of time talking about the Legendary Lords and what I think of them, so let's actually jump into the other characters, right? Let's jump into the units themselves with a full roster. The roster for the Chaos Dwarfs is actually fairly large, as expected, with a race pack DLC. The Chaos Dwarfs themselves have a very varied roster, mostly focusing around heavy infantry, a lot of gunpowder, a lot of artillery, whilst also being supported by cheap but fast hobgoblin units and very devastating heavy cavalry and big monsters. It's a all-purpose faction with magic, armor, and gunpowder. What's not to love, right? It covers all the bases in terms of a Warhammer Fantasy army. This is very, very close to that of a army book, very similar to what we've seen with the Tomb King roster. It's as close to an army book as we would get from a DLC, and I overall think it's quite good. First up, I do want to mention the fact that I'm very happy that Creative Assembly have also decided to mix both Chaos Dwarf aesthetics. If you didn't know, we had Chaos Dwarfs with big hats in the earlier editions, and then we had the more metal style Chaos Dwarfs that we saw in Tamilcon. A lot of people wanted one, a lot of people wanted the other. I'm really happy that they decided to just say, let's go both ways here and implement both different styles, updating the older ones to be a bit more modern, but it still feels like a Chaos Dwarf. It still feels like the army from the 90s that a lot of people remember. Familiarity is very, very important, not so much for the newer people who have been getting into Warhammer through Total War, but for a lot of the old fans, a lot of the old guard who have been part of this for many, many, many years on the tabletop. It's really nice to go back and see pretty much your old miniatures brought to life in a sense. I really do appreciate it as a long-term Warhammer Fantasy fan, as someone who has actually painted up these miniatures and have got a lot more in the pile of shame. It does bring a sense of nostalgia here, especially since Warhammer Fantasy is no longer with us until hopefully later next year. The roster itself performs well, at least from what I've seen in campaign and a little bit of multiplayer battles. You might have seen a lot of creators lose a lot during multiplayer battles, but keep in mind that since they didn't really have too much time to actually prepare, because when we basically get access, we're basically thrown into the deep end, so a lot of YouTubers are still probably trying to find what works best in terms of battles and so on. But in campaign, they dominate. I've seen them do a lot of damage. I've been able to take on 2, 3, sometimes 4 armies at the same time, obviously given the right amount of attack and all that. But the race does perform very, very well. There are a few factions which can count as a hard counter, but that again is expected, and I think it's pretty much performing as it should. Ultimately, the roster's good. Campaign, they dominate, but then again, that's supposed to be something that is expected due to the fact that it's a Forge World army. In the tabletop, you paid a lot of money, and I mean, like, you know how expensive Warhammer is now? Yeah, a Forge World army is double, sometimes triple that. And since the implementation and inspiration for these armies in Total War are taken from the tabletop, it's going to be a very similar sense. So they're going to be very strong, they're going to be very destructive, and that's what we have. Yes, there are a few things missing from the roster, like the Chaos Siege Giant, which was mentioned by a lot of the fanbase, and obviously some other stuff like the Hobgoblin Bolt Thrower, which Creative Assembly don't seem to like bolt throwers for some reason. It's actually pretty annoying that race packs don't just complete the races, but yeah, no race in the Total War Warhammer series is actually complete yet. Despite the fact that this is a, 7-year-old series, yep, no race is actually 100% complete, and it's likely not going to be the case for a while, and this is just going from the 8 editions of Warhammer Fantasy that we have so far, and obviously a few little bits from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and any other sources. There might even be new stuff that we'll get in the future when it comes to Warhammer the Old World, as that can be expected. But yeah, there's stuff missing for the Chaos Dwarfs. I would say in the future, expect another DLC. Especially if this one sells out quite well, which I imagine it would. What's actually missing from the Chaos Dwarfs right now really doesn't mean that the Chaos Dwarfs are weak or anything. In fact, they are very strong, like I've said multiple times. So if anything, in the future, if we do get DLC for DLC, which is going to be expected, and ultimately, I do not mind as long as it's done well, and obviously the other lords end up having some unique mechanics. As long as it's done well, then nobody should really be too mad. The unique lore of magic. Okay, so we do have the lore of Hashut. This is something that we've known since like early editions of Warhammer Fantasy, and then was kind of brought into its newer state in the Tamacon series. Obviously with Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs, we are seeing it live for the first time in a sense, and it's a decent lore, I must say. Very aggressive, a lot of damage, some debuffs there which are quite useful too. Overall, I think it's a pretty good lore. I do feel like some of the spells are very overcosted, like for example one spell which is basically just a very expensive version of Soul Leech. But yeah, it's actually quite interesting to see this being brought to life, as I'm always very curious to see how Creative Assembly end up interpreting the laws of magic. Now, it's not the best lore of magic that they have access to. I'd say that goes to the lore of metal, at least in my opinion, as the lore of metal has always been high damage. But, you know, you've got access to the lore of Hashut, the lore of metal, the lore of fire, and the lore of death, which means that you have quite a decent bit of variety. The fact that the lore of Hashut's passive trait is being around the spellcaster doing damage around his area when he's casting, I kind of like that. It obviously means that you can keep your spellcaster up close. You've already seen those spellcasters up close. They're able to do damage like a normal melee lord, and this is another thing that the Chaos Dwarfs have for them. Their spellcasters aren't really that squishy, and it does quite well. You know, get close, do some damage, cast some spells, do extra damage alongside these damaging spells. I like the idea. It does it very, very well. Very different to what we've seen, obviously, in the tabletop anyway, but a good interpretation overall. That lore of magic is best used with Drazo of the Ashen, as he does a lot of damage. He can reduce the Winds of Magic on a very powerful spell, but normal sorcerer, prophets, and even demon smiths will be able to use that quite well. So, yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the lore of magic other than one spell being overcosted. It's pretty good, and it works as it should. The fact is, more races need their unique laws. We have that already with some, but it's very obvious with, like, say, for example, the Wood Elves, who are still missing the lore of Athloran. Visually, it's great, and I must say that it's probably one of the better looking lores out there. It's great to see how the series has improved over the years, and certain aspects such as laws of magic, the spells in question being used, end up looking better and better. This is also a thing with the lore of fire that just got a pretty heavy visual rework for the actual game for this patch update 3.0. Now we have to jump into the campaign aspects of stuff, right? And I will say that the Chaos Dwarfs are probably the most fleshed out in terms of a campaign that we've seen for Total War Warhammer so far. If you compare them to other factions, well, you're not really going to get something similar. The no growth situation, having laborers turned into raw materials, turned into armaments, which all of those three things can be used for other things already, and the conclave of influence that can be used for everything else too. There are loads and loads of mechanics. Yes, a lot of stuff has been reused. Laborers is basically just taken from the Dark Elf slave mechanic, and obviously the Sinesh mechanic, which is base game for them too. But the way that it was expanded to then have have, for example, different types of settlements, which would produce different types of materials, which would then be used for different types of things. The way I compared it on a stream, as I've been streaming this DLC for pretty much almost 10 hours a day, taking a break very recently as I felt rather ill, is that this feels kinda like a new step up. It's a new type of DLC, and it's a new standard that hopefully we'll see for future race packs if we do get more race packs in the future. The fact is that Total War Warhammer started off originally as a Total War game just with monsters and magic. And as we saw it expand into Game 2, we saw it more fleshed out. Now in Game 3, we're seeing all these factions separating from base games, separating from other races and factions, where there's a lot of unique play. You can see that here. The fact that you have towers, outposts, and factories, 3 different types of settlements that you can have pretty much anywhere. It's very, very different to what we've seen before. You can pick and choose where those settlements go. You can pick and choose what you're producing. Do you want a whole province to be focused around just producing raw materials? Do you want it to just be focused around money? Do you want it to be focused around armaments? Do you have the materials? Do you have the planning? It's really interesting that you have to actually sit down and plan as you progress through your campaign. Now, I'm not saying that every race needs to be this fleshed out in the future, because, well, let's be very, very honest, not all races need to be that complex, as it is a complex race. If you play Total War kind of casually, then this might feel very complex to you, and it is complex. I must admit that when I first fired up the DLC when we first got access, I was a bit like, well, this is a bit much. However, after a few turns, after just going into it a little bit, I was like, well, this is actually quite stylized. This is pretty good. And I grew to love it more and more. Yes, I can freely say that I very much enjoy playing this race, and it's probably because of the fact that it is so different. Because, yeah, you know, having different factions, different races, different mechanics, it does keep this game alive. We've been seeing so many different races and factions being introduced over the years, but everything's felt a little samey, doesn't it? This is very, very different. I could say that the Chaos Dwarf campaign, in general, with Immortal Empires, feels as one of my top campaigns so far. Having to think about what to do next, planning my stages in advance, this is honestly a lot more fleshed out than I could have hoped for, and I hope that this gets taken into account in future content patches, as we've already seen quite good upgrades, right? The Warriors of Chaos and Champions of Chaos, which introduced the warband system from Total War Saga Troy. This is very new as far as I remember, or at least as far as I can tell, and yeah, it's great. Technology is something that I will heavily compliment. You see, it's basically 3 separate trees, and I feel like it's just so well done, mostly because it's not cluttered. If you remember, like, for example, the other dwarf faction, everything is just kind of overwhelming because everything is in plain sight. I like the idea of switching between different tabs and being able to just relax there. You know, you can make your choices but not feel overwhelmed just because there is different areas where, you know, out of sight, out of mind in a sense. Now, you'll still remember it because obviously if you want to focus on industry, you'll go to the industry section, but the idea is it's not so in your face. It's not giving you that panic that, oh, am I going down the right area? Because there's certain races, the Skaven, the obviously the dwarves, a little bit with the lizardmen, but the lizardmen tech tree is just horrible in general. So this feels so much better. I really like the implementation of the Tower of Zar, if I can be completely honest, because it adds a little bit of politics to the Chaos Dwarfs. Because the Tower of Zar, there are limited seats. You want to claim them because you want those bonuses. The other factions want those bonuses too. Overall, there are bonuses that the whole faction as a whole can get, but yeah, there's still underlying ones, some very powerful ones that everyone wants to control. So you can take it for yourself, but then the AI might take it from you. Now, do you risk taking that for yourself back, or taking one that they've already taken and get some diplomatic issues with them, possibly ending up in a Chaos Dwarf civil war? It's a very interesting style thing. Again, something that I'd probably like to see with the Skaven. We have more civil wars, but yeah, we'll talk about that in a different video, don't you worry. It's very, very good. In terms of story, I'm not going to really talk about it much, mostly because I don't like to talk about spoilers. We'll probably have a video of that in the future or something, but really, it's decent. You can tell there's an obvious influence there. Just within a few turns and just details, you'll get the whole, oh, there's a lot of Tolkien influence, even though it's just done into a bit of a darker sense. And Creative Assembly can say that it's not, but it's the same thing as how Daniel was inspired by Arthas. You can lie all you want, but if you mirror image Arthas' storyline alongside Daniel, that's pretty much the same thing. And yeah, you see it here too. There is some Tolkien influence here with certain aspects. The story in itself is written well, though. I think it's not too bad. I always do say that you should really play the Realm of Chaos campaign at least once, because the story for the base game is actually decent once. Champions of Chaos actually has a very good story too. It's very reminiscent of Tamokon, and this one is not too bad. Yeah, it's well written, there's good storyline, there's good cinematics. Overall, I think it's not bad, and this is as spoiler-free as I can talk about it. But who am I kidding? The majority of you don't really care about the story anyway, considering that, yeah, we know that the majority of the players are playing in Immortal Empires. It's something that we know for a fact, because the player base skyrocketed once Immortal Empires was made free for everyone. So, yeah. Still, give it a try at least once. It's actually not bad. I'd say for a Warhammer standard, I'd give it like a 6 or a 7 out of 10, which is pretty high considering that most Warhammer fantasy, well, Warhammer in general, the lore is kind of garbage in most cases, but this isn't too bad. Alright, so we're going to talk about the price now, and this is something that really needed to be talked about because, yes, there's been a price increase. 25 euros, this is because I see it as euros. For some reason, Steam wants to put my area as euros, despite the fact that we pay in sterling, but okay. Anyways, yeah, it had a massive price rise compared to other race packs, and yeah, 25%, it's noticeable. The thing is, we have to see it in multiple locations, right? The fact is, yes, there is a recession going on and things are getting more expensive. And I know some people are going to fight me there, but, you know, just listen to me, because if you say that your shopping is not really getting any more expensive, or your lights and stuff like that, you either live in a paradise world, or you don't actually pay your bills. Regardless of that, yeah, the price has gotten higher. I personally am fine with it. I obviously have to disclose here that I've gotten the DLC for free, but it's less than a box of 20 clan rats. If you're a Warhammer tabletop fan, this is probably not bothering you, because we pay stupid amounts of money for pretty much a fraction of an army. I mean, a box of clan rats is not really even going to field enough for a basic core detachment. Put it this way, in terms of clan rats, which cost around £22 for a box of 20, I need to buy around 5 boxes minimum to have a decent core, and even then I'll usually bring more. That's why I have an ungodly amount of clan rats. So from a tabletop perspective, yeah, it's not that bad. If I wasn't a content partner, I would have probably bought this DLC too. There is a discount going on, which is like 10% before the first week after launch, and I'm sure there's other websites which have better prices anyway, but I do sympathize with a bunch of people who are against the price, mostly because Creative Assembly should really have stated why the price is going up. The problem with Creative Assembly is they kind of do stuff and then they stick their heads in the sand, which is absolutely frustrating. This is something that they need to stop doing. They're a major studio and they still act like a small indie company sometimes, which is really, really annoying. But yeah, look, just be honest with people, and I think people would understand more if you just flat out said, look, things are getting more expensive. Possibly Sega, who own Creative Assembly, you have to keep that in mind, told us to up the price because of cost of production or whatever. It's just letting us know. Obviously, maybe Sega would have told them they can't say that, but you know what I mean, right? A little bit of information, a little bit of just clarity would be absolutely wonderful, because Creative Assembly's communication has gotten better, and I feel like this was a little bit of a black mark. The way I see it is as follows. Are you going to play this DLC? Right? Are you going to play it for a decent amount of time? How much time do you spend on Total War? That will be the way that you can justify if you can make this purchase or not. I spend a lot of time on Total War, so this is something that I wouldn't mind actually buying myself. It's also the case that we're likely going to get, DLC every 4 months? Creative Assembly have said that they'd like to do 2 more DLCs this year, 3 in total, so that would be 4 months time another one, and then 4 months time being December, the last DLC. $25 in a 4-month spread is not too bad. 25 euros, sorry. I could see that as justifiable, but then again, I spend way more than that on tabletop stuff. but it's just the case of that. Yeah, 25, it's just 5 extra, obviously focusing on the Euro section here. I don't know how high it's gotten for the other places, but that's just basically like 1 pint less of the bar, basically. Now, what I did find very odd was people comparing the price rides to Lord packs. Lord packs and race packs are completely different, and the prices have always been very, very different. You can compare that to Warhammer 2 DLC or Warhammer 1. So I'm not sure why the main focus was looking at Lord packs. Yes, that was something I kept seeing on various different sources, and it was just really bizarre to me. There's a few things that do bother me about this DLC, and we're going to talk about stuff which is just going to come into update 3.0. The fact is, yeah, there's not a lot of maps, and it's really disappointing. Yeah, we've got a new race, fancy new look, new aesthetics and so on. There's like 2 maps for minor settlement battles and 2 maps for major settlement battles, and if memory serves, there's about 5 maps that come into effect when it comes to normal land battles. Now, I know this isn't the most important thing, but a new race, you'd expect loads of new maps, right? You'd expect something to be quite stylized. It's really disappointing because that means that you will see the same thing over and over again. The Darklands is not that big of a territory, sure, but it does worry me that potential DLC like Ind and Koresh, 2 nations which are fairly large, will only have small maps in terms of that too. These maps will be available to you whether you purchase the DLC or not, but it's one of these things. It feels like Creative Assembly have just kind of given up with the whole settlement battle system, because whilst fighting through the Darklands, I barely fought through settlement battles, which is weird because I had to take a bunch of fights in, but most of it was just land battles. It's very disappointing. It looks like we're going for a step back. I don't know if Creative Assembly are just too hot-headed to basically agree that, yes, the building system is just really bad, but yeah, it's just kind of annoying, and it's kind of disappointing. Update 3.0. Now, by the time that I'm recording this video, which is, by the way, the day before that this comes out, the script was done prior, but still, no patch notes, which is really, really weird. I am imagining that they'll release it today, but yeah, no big changes as far as I've seen. Yes, they've done some updates to some stuff. The Warriors of Sinesh, for example, now have poison attacks, which is pretty good. The Plague Toads of Nurgle now actually have some armor-piercing damage, which is really, really good. Bretonnian Cavalry is better. The Sineshi Cavalry got a bit of a nerf. However, their chariots got a little bit better. It's supposed to be a big patch, which I'm assuming is focusing mostly on balancing, but no changes to campaign factions, which is a massive shame. It would have been great, like Immortal Empires drop and, you know, Champions of Chaos and so on. That patch cycle had a few changes to campaigns to be able to fix things up, to give some new breath of fresh air to certain factions. It's a massive shame that this didn't happen. Creative Assembly have said many times that they'd like patches to fix up some factions, and the reason why I'm actually not that disappointed about this is because I kind of expected it. It looks like the majority of the work behind this on all the devs and so on has been on the DLC, which is actually expected, and unfortunately also the FLC. So we're going to talk about the FLC right now. The first FLC is Ulrika, a surprise actually, because, you know, a legendary hero was not really expected. Normally we get a legendary lord alongside that to start up a new faction. But Ulrika is a rather interesting character. People do like her. The fact that she's available to Kislev and the Empire will give them a little bit of a nudge forward in power in case you need a little bit of extra help. And believe me, those 2 factions desperately need it right now. Kislev more than anyone else. And she is a Total War Access character, so she's actually something that you have to log into your CA account, link that up to Steam. So usually those things are generic heroes and so on. The Catchword Spider, for example, or just like generic heroes. So it's kind of nice to be able to have a big named character as a legendary hero. A lot of people said that she should have been a lord, but really she's a side character in most cases. Yeah, she did have her own novels, but I like the idea that she's been introduced in one way, shape or form. I'm a big fan of hers, so I can't really complain. The problem is that we don't have any generic FLC. So normally in FLC we have like a legendary lord or anything else which is available on the Steam page. You know, it's listed as its own DLC type of thing. And we know why. Mirror of Madness is a thing which, you know, is pretty cool. I mean, it's one thing that you're going to play once or twice, possibly just to unlock all the items, and that's pretty much it. and then probably never think about it again. But it's a collaboration between Intel and Creative Assembly, and I can almost assure you that a lot of dev time went into this to try and make it engaging, because at the end of the day, Creative Assembly need to work with, you know, other sources of income, right? These types of collaborations are obviously very lucrative because this is the second time that it's happening with Intel. With regards to Total War Warhammer, I believe there was also some sort of collaboration when it came to Intel with a Total War Saga Troy, but yeah, nobody thinks about Troy at this point. I really do think that a lot of time was spent here, and I'll be honest with you, I like it, but it's literally going to be played twice and that's it. I've unlocked like 4 of the items already, and I don't feel a reason to go back to it, because it's going to be useful for Daniel, and it's only for the Tzeentch one. Had there been items for all of Daniel's parts, so if you would have dedicated them to Nurgle, to Tzeentch, to Khorne, to Slaanesh, and also Undivided, had there been split, or just more items in general, I feel like it would have been a lot more worth it, but yeah, I can tell you, I don't remember the last time I ever dedicated to Tzeentch when I played Daniel. I'm asking you guys too. It seems like a bit of a waste, but it might be lucrative in the future, because at the end of the day, whatever this partnership does entail and what brings to Creative Assembly might actually benefit us in the future when it comes to new content, new DLC, whatever. But it's one of those partnerships that are just unknown, so we don't know exactly what it actually brings. All I know right now is that's taken up a raid tier, you know, in a sense that's a Warcraft term, but yeah, we could have had a FLC Legendary Lord. It's cool, don't get me wrong, and will the player base actually use it? I mean, we're gonna have to wait and see. You guys will be able to use this as from tomorrow, but yeah, it just feels like a bit of a waste. Marketing for the DLC was kind of bad too. Let's be very honest here, it was really spread out. It was like a 4-week marketing plan with everything pretty much being shown within the first 2 weeks. Then it was 2 weeks of like null, which was just kind of annoying. Not only from a content creator perspective, but also from like a fan perspective. We saw everything. They blew their load within the first week and a half, and then it was just a slow wait for the content creators to actually show stuff. And then from a content creator perspective, they showed everything. It was a bit annoying. It felt like there was no point making videos. I lost steam very early on because everything was showcased. I don't know, it felt like it was better with Champions of Chaos. It definitely felt better with Champions of Chaos, but I guess it's the whole, I don't know, I can't understand. They do a good one, they do a bad one, they do a good one, they do a bad one. This is just in terms of marketing, not in terms of DLC. From some other notes, you know, I can really appreciate the aesthetic of stuff. I can really appreciate that the characters speak a dark version of Khazad. It's really cool and really thematic, engaging, and something that we need more in the future. I wouldn't say that we need a DLC in the future with just having the Bretonnians speaking French and, you know, the Reichlanders speaking German and all that type of stuff. But theme like this is just really, really nice because it throws you off. You know, you didn't really expect it. At least I didn't. As the normal dwarves speak English, well, it's supposed to be that they're speaking Reichspiel because it's the whole immersion thing. But yeah, you know, English is just how they are. But it was definitely kind of nice, and I will give them props for that. I think that it was very immersive, and I've been playing a lot of this DLC. I think it's just very immersive to hear Dark Khazad being spoken by all the characters, the units, and so on. It does really bring me into the Warhammer universe. In my conclusion here, we're going to talk about a few things. So yes, this is a unique race. They are taking aspects from other races in terms of certain mechanics, but they've expanded it from it quite heavily. There's stuff that I would love to see being reused. The labor mechanics being sent to the Dark Elves, the Conclave stuff being sent to the Skaven. We'll talk about that in a different video in another day. I'm really impressed with the look and feel of the faction. It's really nice finally seeing the Chaos Dwarfs in the flesh, essentially, as it's an army that I'm even too intimidated to paint. You know, the whole Forge World minis being resin and so on. So seeing them like this is really, really cool. From the perspective of a long-time Warhammer Fantasy fan, you know, someone who's been in the hobby for so long, this is incredible. This is exactly what I imagined from a lot of stuff, surprises on the other stuff. I am very, very impressed, and I would love to see more of this coming into the future as, again, wow, you know, seeing an army that I've always very much admired It's great. It's honestly really, really cool. I think that there is value to this DLC. If you don't think so, you're better off waiting for a sale. But after about 150 hours playing with this, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, I've had fun. I like the DLC. I think it's very, very good. It's definitely one of the better DLCs. It's very obvious that we're getting more and more quality being thrown at us. And yeah, seeing DLC quality improving over the years is fantastic. Hopefully, and I say this knocking on wood and praying to the gods, that the DLC doesn't break upon launch, because that can happen, and I'm very worried that that will be the case. But I can say that I've enjoyed myself. I can say that I really, really have enjoyed myself, and I will easily support this product. If I didn't, I wouldn't be making so many videos on it. I did make a promise on myself that if I found myself getting bored and stuff, I was just going to stop. And that's been the case with other products, with other games and so on. So I can tell you, I'm having fun. I'm telling you that I really think that this has a lot of potential. If you like something very different, if you want a different faction, something very, very different, you're going to enjoy this. It's very clear that they've gone in very heavily into the lore, into the creation of this race. There's been a lot of love poured into it. This feels like the 4th edition army. This feels like the 8th edition army, both mixed up very, very well, but still keeping the true aesthetic of the Chaos Dwarfs, the true feel, and I really, really do appreciate that, because it's very easy to get lost in translation. There are other games from other studios who work on a Warhammer title, and they lose the look and feel of stuff as time progresses, or just even at launch, you know? So I'm quite happy. I'm honestly very, very happy. I can't wait to see what the future holds. I really hope that Creative Assembly aren't lying to us with the whole this is the end of the drought situation, because we've had 2 content droughts. It's very important to note here. Some of you are still probably and very justifiably burnt out because, you know, Warhammer 3 launched, drought. Champions of Chaos came in, drought. So even I have my defenses up. I am not trusting Creative Assembly until they prove that this is the end of the drought. Because this is the thing, right? It's very weird, but, you know, we are Warhammer fans. We will happily want more DLC. We want more stuff to play with. It's not like it is for other companies where you get pissed off with DLC, DLC, or DLC, but we want more DLC. So here's hoping for better times. Here's hoping that, you know, this time they actually mean it. They did say that they have plans to do 3 DLCs in total for this game, for this year. So, you know, it's already April. Hopefully they're already working on the next one. Because if another drought kicks in, I feel like that could actually hurt the game. I think it can hurt the fan base. I feel like a 3rd actual drought will actually bring in a lot of burnout, and it's just not good. Let's hope for the best. I'm trying to keep hopeful, but hey. All in all, yeah, you're going to like Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs. You're going to like it. I liked it. I very much liked it. It's a tad more aggressive than I normally play. And I've actually been able to show that on Twitter. You know, I've conquered a lot of the known world in like 160 turns, which normally I play a lot slower. So it definitely took me out of my comfort zone. But with all that being said, I hope this review has helped you out. I'm just talking about what I've liked, what I haven't liked. If I have to give it a number, I'd have to give this a maybe 8 out of 10. It would have been a 10 out of 10 if it would have had a new character, you know, a 4th legendary lord just to have something else. Because I feel like having the diversity in terms of start location would have been good. But hey, what are you going to do? Games Workshop probably said no, and this is how it works. We are at the mercy of Games Workshop, whether we want it or not. But anyways, with all that being said, I hope you found this review helpful. Again, I tried my best. I'm very tired. As you can tell, I've been very, very ill lately. Probably because I was doing all those videos and then freaking streaming for 10 hours a day, stopping at 2 a.m., waking up at 8 a.m., going straight into work from there. It was pretty much just like 18-hour work days non-stop. But I've had fun, and I think that's the most important thing. I am going to take a little break after the DLC launches, though. I'm going to just keep it casual with videos and so on, just to get back up to speed. But yeah. It's definitely a faction that I'm going to play again and again and again. Even after I've done so much playing live and so on, I still feel like I can play another campaign. So that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Anyways, with all that being said, have a good day, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.